founder and president of 6-4 Consultants, retired police officer, master resiliency trainer, writer, and published author, a man who has been told his American is showing. This is David Berez. David, welcome to Positively Ridiculous podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here and to be part of your program.
Excited to have you because I am a big supporter of our boys in blue, and I definitely want to celebrate you for your service to the United States, and then also to the city in which that you were a police officer for how many years?
I was a police officer in East Windsor Township for 20 years and 1 month,
20
and
years.
it's the town I grew up in, so it was truly an honor to serve them back.
Well, what a good guy to have, and I'm really proud to have you here on the show. But we have to talk about this, his American is showing comment, because whenever I asked you, I was like, tell me the most flattering insult that you've ever received. You gave me two. So the first one was, you are so ordinary. And then the second one was this one that you said that you qualified later, that they were just like, David, your American is showing. Give me some background on that. Give me some red, white, and blue notes. Come on.
So it was a great conversation, actually, in MAPP class. I'm not going to divulge who said it to save face on the other end, but it was a great moment that was said kind of in jest, but kind of in not. We were talking about something that was politically charged, and it was an interesting moment. It was related to universal income and how there's a psychology study that shows that universal income can bring happiness to people. And I was like, that's great. I'm sure it worked well in a laboratory, but whose pocket is that coming out of? Because I pay enough in my taxes to the community and to the country that I don't feel like I need to pay more for somebody else not to work. And so when I kind of shed a little light on where does it come from, the money doesn't grow on trees thing, the response was, David, your American showing again. And it was, at first I was like, whoa, that's a little hard. But then I was like, you know what? That is the best thing anybody ever said to me, because I'm such a patriot through and through. I bleed red, white, and blue, that it was awesome, actually. So I appreciated the backhanded compliment slash, and I don't know what it was, but it was awesome. I loved it.
Okay, let's just say that it was part of it was just part of intellectual inquiry, right?
That's it.
So this is the thing is that we have these discussions because we understand that there's real world implications for these theories and hypotheses and ideas that are trying to be made into policies, and sometimes even into laws. So to have discourse, respectful discourse, is a great thing. And that's what you and I both believe positive psychology can do, is that we can have respectful discourse and we can see the opinions of both sides and try to come to some kind of agreement based on humanity. I think that's pretty much the best way to sum it up.
I love that. And, it was interesting because, positive psychology, as we know, is a living, breathing science. And it's something that continues to evolve. It's not an old science. It's quite new, actually. And to understand that things that work in a laboratory may not be operationalizable in the real world is a conversation that some people just aren't having. And I think it was a great way to open up to connect those dots for people that, yeah, it was a great idea in a lab when they interviewed people, but it may not work in real life because who's going to pay for it? So, but it was a great conversation. It was funny. Everybody got a good chuckle out of it. And honestly, I use that phrase all the time now with people. I love it.
Whenever you were discussing universal income, was this based on the previous studied, if everyone made $60,000 a year, they would be happy?
I believe so. This was, we're talking 6 months ago in this conversation already. So, but if I recall correctly, that's what it was about.
Well, it didn't mean that if you made $60,000 a year that you'd be happy. What it meant is that you would have basic human needs supplied for, right? And you wouldn't have to worry so much. And so then that's something that you could start to concentrate on, with something like well-being and joy and happiness. And you were able to get to your higher functioning brain whenever you knew that your basic needs were being met. And so that was an interesting study too. And I agree. I think that we have to look at it from a more broad perspective, especially from outside the United States. There's a lot of cultural implications and nuances that can come into play. Now, tell me about, you're so ordinary, David, because from what I just heard, what you just told me, I don't think you're so ordinary, bro.
Oh, I appreciate that. I think because I don't know if it's a compliment or not to be called ordinary. I haven't decided yet. So yeah, it was my wife's cousin's husband. He's a very uh, sophisticated appearing type guy. He is
Appearing.
a
I like how you
exactly.
qualified. I like how you qualified that with appearing.
Yeah, he's a character for sure. And I don't know who he is on the inside because he doesn't let you find that out, quite frankly. But on the outside, he is a very sophisticated curator of dog art. And yeah, so he's a character. And his biggest insult to people is you're so ordinary because he finds himself to be incredibly intriguing based
Mm.
on his personal interests of exotic dog art.
Not everybody's into that. I'm sure that it's very specifically niche. Um, the first thing that came to my mind whenever you mentioned that is, have you ever seen an episode of Bob's Burgers?
I have.
The cartoon Bob's
Yes.
Burgers. Okay.
Yes.
There,
My kids
there's one,
love it.
yeah, it's a great show. And there's actually a lot of positive psychology moments in that show, especially whenever we're talking about relationships and resilience. I mean, my God, that family has to have some resilience. But there was one specific episode where Linda's sister, she started painting because she needed an outlet, and we all know that the humanities are very good, and they really do help us to manage stress and kind of get the things that we can't say out into the world. Well, she started to paint the buttholes of cats.
Interesting.
Interesting, right? So there's this entire episode of her with this complete collection of cat buttholes. And I mean, it's like the cat is turned around, the tail is up, and it's like looking back at you. It's like, is this even decent? Like, I kind of feel dirty even watching this. And so Bob is forced to hang Gail, that's the sister's name, to hang Gail's art in the restaurant. So people are coming in, they're seeing that there's hat butts on the wall, and they're just turning around and walking out. So I say to your brother-in-law, there's a place for everybody.
I agree.
Art.
Our art is definitely up to the interpretation of the artist and the viewer, right? So it's
That's that's correct. Yeah. I mean, look, people find each other. Thanks to
sure.
the internet, people can find each other and they can enjoy these hobbies.
But I like being ordinary.
Let's talk about your call to duty. Let's talk about your career in law enforcement. How did you get started, man?
So that's it was such a journey. So it actually goes back to when I was a little kid before like I even knew what policing was or law enforcement was. I was 7 years old. I had been a really sick kid growing up. And at 7 years old, I needed my tonsils and adenoids removed.
Ooh.
So yeah, so it's a pretty common thing, but back then it was a little bit more invasive. Now it's like an outpatient or whatever. But I was in the hospital for a couple of days with that. And the fact that these doctors and nurses were able to fix me was so awesome. And I just thought it was like the coolest thing ever. I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to be a pediatric doctor. I wanted to fix other kids. So fast forward to when I was 14 years old and I was able to join the local rescue squad in the town I was living in. I thought that was a great way to start my medical career. So I did that. I became an EMT. I did all the cool rescue squad stuff as a volunteer. I was one of those, crazy folks that woke up in the middle of the night to respond to calls and lights on your private, whatever. So it was a great experience. I got to meet some really awesome people, both on the the EMS side through the paramedics and whatever, but also on the law enforcement side, who were the cops in my town that responded to those calls along with EMS. Then when I got to college, my goal was to take pre-med classes, biology classes primarily. And then freshman year, uh, my first semester freshman year, I take botany, which for those of you that are not familiar with sciences and botany, that is the study of plant cells. And I secured my first failing college grade first semester of freshman year because I could not master the concept of studying plant cells.
Hmm.
And I was like, yep, medicine ain't going to happen. We need to move on and find something else.
So after you found out that medicine wasn't going to happen because you got your butt kicked by a plant, did you then start to think about how fun it was to basically hit the lights and sirens and like get on CB and say, we're coming in hot? Because that was some of my favorite things to do.
I loved the whole emergency operations management thing, like just the thrill, the adrenaline, the being able to help people, and there's moments of panic, like being the calm in the storm, like the whole thing was so captivating to me. And it, you do develop like this little bit of a hero complex, but
Yeah.
but you're not a hero. You're just there to help somebody in their time of need. Um,
I would like to maybe backtrack on that statement. I think that our first responders are heroes. And I know that you don't mean that in derogatory sense. I know that you don't. But it does take a certain type of person, and sometimes it can be ego. I took look, I was a female critical care nurse on a helicopter. I know what it is to face paramedic ego.
oh yeah.
But at the same time, I will say that our first responders are the type of people that are selfless, and they knew what they were getting into. And even if they didn't, once they got there, they stayed. Now, there is a high rate of burnout, especially in EMTs and paramedics. And there's a lot of reason for that. One, again, like we're talking about, the job itself is hard. The job
Yes.
itself is very draining. There's a lot of being on call for that job. And there's also a lot of calls that were never emergencies to begin with. But there's
Mhm.
some unfortunate people out there that sometimes just need the attention or the human interaction, and then also just a ride to the hospital. Or I mean, that's what they're supposed to do, ambulances, but I mean, just to ride across town. It was really interesting, the stories that the paramedics and EMTs would tell me about what healthcare was like on the streets. And so I applaud them. I applaud them for sticking with it, and putting up with that stuff.
And emergencies are in the eyes of the beholder, just like art.
Yeah.
So it's you just don't know what constitutes an emergency for somebody else.
Right. That's very true. Emergency art. That's very true. Emergency medicine is art. I
It
love it.
is.
Yeah.
So after that experience in college, I figured I needed a new path. And so winter break, freshman year, I had sat down. I was actually on a volunteer schedule for Christmas, and I met up with my friend. His name was Todd. He was a police officer in our town. And he was just telling me all kinds of stories on Christmas Eve about policing. And it was just a generic conversation, organic, nothing provoked about it. And I was like, darn, this is what I got to be doing. And it kind of combined my passion for helping others, but in a way that was more impactful for me and didn't include botany. So I was transitioned my emergency-ness from the EMS side into law enforcement. And I never looked back. I worked for public safety in college. And then after college, I did an internship with the New York City Medical Examiner's Office, which was also kind of that balance between medicine and enforcement and investigations. And then I became a special in Seaside Heights, Seaside Park, New Jersey. So if anybody's watched the Jersey Shore, that is Seaside Heights side of Seaside, and we'd walk the boardwalk, and they trained us as police officers. Went to the police academy, and then I got hired full time in East Windsor, where I spent my entire career.
Wow. That's quite an amazing story. That's a very circuitous route to get to law enforcement. But what an amazing journey. And it all started with plant cells, right? It all started
So
with you going up against a plant cell. Looking back, looking back, did you perceive at the, perceive at the time that you had failed and like your dream of becoming a pediatric doctor was no more? How did you perceive that moment?
So that's an interesting thought. I've never really reflected back on that. So I think at the time, I did feel like a failure for two reasons. One is because the dream I had come to an end,
Mm.
the perceived dream anyway. And then the fact that my mom, who is a single mom, raising me and my sister, was doing everything she could to give me a life that she didn't necessarily have herself, paying for me to go to a private college was a very heavy lift. And I felt like I failed her. So to me, that hurt more than not necessarily living my dream, because I knew I'd recalibrate and I was finding a new dream
Mm.
that worked for me, but I knew it wasn't her dream. And I knew it wasn't in line with her values and wants for me. And we had those discussions. So that's where I felt like I failed the most. I feel like I had failed her.
So it was really more external pressure that made you feel like you had failed.
Correct.
Yeah. So I also want to speak to you about your grandfather, because this is someone I think too that definitely was a role model and an inspiration in your life. And I would love for you to tell us the story of your grandfather and
My
also how,
grandfather was awesome.
yeah.
He's a cool dude. The so my mom's side of the family, which is this grandfather, they're German. So we called him Opa, which is German for grandfather. And so he was just such a character. He came to this country when he was about 17 years old in 1938, I believe it was, just around the time of Kristallnacht, when the Holocaust was starting to really kick up. We're German Jews in my family. And so obviously they were pushed out of their own country, and he came here to find family. He left his parents behind. His parents did end up perishing in the concentration camps, but he found his way. He is the epitome of resilience. He found his way as a 17-year-old kid to make enough money and sustenance for himself to be able to survive. And then once he had that level of survival under his belt, he was able to turn that survival into thriving. And he found his own way and his own path in life. But he was such a patriot. When he got to this country and saw the American flag hanging from the Statue of Liberty for the first time, he always told me this. He goes, "I knew I was home."
Wow.
And it was so impactful. And that's where honestly, where my patriotism itself comes from, because everything this country meant to my family, I
Mhm.
wouldn't be here, but not for this country. So I'm so grateful for that. And he taught me a lot. And he was, gosh, was he such a character. He would not survive in today's politically correct world at all, which is hysterical to think about. He was Archie Bunker. He was, but not with a mean bone in his body. It was just how he identified with people.
Mhm.
Uh, so he used their identification, whether it would be their job or their origin or the way they look, to be able to identify them as what they meant to him, and not necessarily in a negative way,
Right.
which was great. So
So
it was
just
just awesome.
so as an for an example, your grandfather would probably be like, John, the fat guy that's balding that works at the mechanic shop, that John.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, that's your grandfather. And I'm going to have to say that my grandfather was the same way. And my grandfather was an Italian immigrant, and so he was someone who came over on the boats. And whenever he got to America, he signed up to be in the Marines, and he was Iwo Jima Marine,
Oh
and he
wow.
saw, yeah, so he saw things I can't even imagine. And I honestly I don't want to imagine. He never spoke about the war. He never spoke about what he did in the war. And we always knew that for him, it seemed like a very heavy burden what had happened, but he was always still very proud of proud to have served. And we were very proud of him. And then, his service then led to one of my uncles going into the Air Force, my other uncle going into the Navy and becoming a Navy Seabee. So we have a long history of people in service to their country.
My grandfather's version of ethics and values was something that I have taken with me throughout my entire life. And like I said, he may not be what people would find today to be acceptable in his way he describes things or sees things, but his ethics and values far surpassed his ability to communicate them. And it was the way he showed them that was important, and not necessarily the words he used to communicate them. And I truly value the lessons I've learned from him over the years as a family man, as an entrepreneur, just somebody that was able to give back more than he took.
I think that it's really important that you say he showed me his values. I think in modern society, we hear about what a lot of people believe, what they think. We just don't see a lot of action. We
Agreed.
don't, we don't see a lot of substance to those words. So yeah, I'm someone who I'll listen to what you have to say, and then I'm going to watch to see if you do it. And that's how I'm going to know who you are and what your character really is made of. So, yeah, I believe in action. I believe in having great conversation. I believe in joking. I believe in having, tough talks, and then also, doing stupid stuff. I mean, that's basically what I'm making money off of. But I also believe that our actions speak louder than words.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what has honestly propelled me into the whole positive psychology world, because we can learn so much from the tools that we learn in this field and how to apply them in the places that are valued to us as individuals. And we can use the same tools for different values. You don't have to see the world the same way I do, but you can use the same tools to make it better in your version of that. So I think it kind of brings those sides together, because we're all speaking the same language, even if we're doing it for different reasons.
Love that. I love that, David. So let's talk about your transition from law enforcement into positive psychology. So, what sparked the shift?
So my career was awesome. I loved it. And in law enforcement, and I'm sure you saw on the EMS side as well, there's a lot of internal turbulence. There's a lot of organizational trauma stuff that happens far beyond what you do as a job. It's the organizational stuff that often gets to people the most. So I struggled with that throughout my career, and that was just, an added bonus to all the things that are layered that you see over the years that you kind of just package in the back and hope that you don't have to revisit. But some point in time, they come out when you least expect it.
Yeah.
So when I got to the end of my career, I did 20 years and I was ready to go, but I didn't realize that I really wasn't ready to go, and I wasn't prepared to go. So I knew I wanted to leave. I just wasn't prepared to. So my transition was a little bit rocky. And I think that's one thing that the military does really well, is they have these transition assistance programs, the TAP programs. We don't have that on the state law enforcement side or the EMS or fire side. That's something the federal government, for all its ilk, does very well, is they transition people out of service back into civilian life. We don't have that. So my transition was rocky. I didn't love it. I retired January 1st of 2020. So when we all sit down and do the math for that, we have the pandemic that was really firing up. We have all the civil unrest stuff. Literally things were on fire, right? And I'm now sitting on my couch like, oh, darn, what did I do here? And it was,
You got out just in time. That's what you did, David. You got out just in time. But no, but honestly, an officer of 20 years, how did you feel in that moment watching what was happening, in the country? And particularly, you're in New York, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
We're actually stuck right in the middle between New York and Philly, so we're in the Trenton area. It was tough, I'm not someone that ever shied away from work adversity. So I was always the first one in and the last one out. That's just how I operated. I wasn't going to let any of my guys get hurt. If someone was going to get hurt, I was going to make sure it was going to be me. I'd rather tell my own family I'm in trouble than have to tell somebody else's family that their loved one's in trouble. So I was just always, put in that effort to make sure that if someone was going to get hurt, it was going to be me. So when I'm sitting home on a couch listening to my guys who I worked with shoulder to shoulder over the course of 20 years, getting their butts handed to them, getting their cars turned over, getting their station set on fire here and trying, like, it was really challenging for me, and I did not handle it well. Then you infuse alcohol into that, you infuse other self-destructive behaviors into that. Things started to fall apart pretty quickly, actually. And what I found comfort in was aiding and supporting those that were still in the fight. So I would go drop cases of beer off people's houses in the middle of the night. I would, make phone calls, send texts. I would check on their wives and their kids. Like I was trying to infuse myself somehow to be part of it. But it was a challenge.
So in New Jersey, Santa brings you cases of beer.
100%.
So Kid Rock Santa, basically. You're a Kid Rock Santa. Okay, love it.
I tried.
Yeah, you did great. I mean, those are selfless things, and those are also small actions that make huge impacts, right? Your intentions were good, and I'm sure that actually helped a lot of people maybe feel seen and supported.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also opened up conversations that allowed people to talk, because they would call me and go, "Hey, thanks for the beer." And just that would open the door for me to say, "Hey, how you doing? Talk to me." And so I found that I was generating these conversations, which we now know is positive psychology, or even some interventions. Not that I don't think Dr. Sullivan would prefer using beer as a positive intervention, but it worked, and it sparked those hard conversations. So it was cathartic for me, because it allowed me to stay involved and connected to the people that meant the most to me, but it also allowed those other folks to open up. So then, unfortunately, July 29th of 2020, my buddy Danny felt that he couldn't fight the fight anymore, and he took his own life. So Danny was a good friend of mine. He was a detective sergeant in town over for me, and our kids go to school together, family, friends, and all. So I realized in that moment that I was also in trouble, because I was able to associate with his decision. And I recognized that, but not for him, it could have possibly been me. And I took that as, shoot, I need to fix this. And so that night I had written a article. So when I retired, I had taken to writing, because in government service, or in law enforcement specifically, you're not allowed to have an opinion and express it. You can have an opinion, but you got to keep it to yourself. So you can't put anything in writing. You can't have media conversations. You can't publish anything. It's just not okay. So in my retirement, I had completely unloaded everything that was stuck in my head for the last 20 years and put it all on paper, which was great. And so that night after Danny had died, I'd written an article, and it was the most seen out of anything I've ever written. And within a few days, it had about 75,000 views, picked up by some national media and stuff like that. So it was an interesting transition into where I am today, because that was the moment that changed everything.
Was Danny still in service whenever he took his
Yes.
life?
Yes, absolutely. There was a lot going on with him. Betrayal is actually the biggest factor, and I think it is for most police officers that end up taking their own lives, or that are in self-destructive behavior modes. He was feeling betrayed by his agency in the wake of all of the civil unrest, by the community that he gave everything to, that he grew up in. And he was feeling betrayed by his own subordinates that he supervised, because he was always the guy to walk into the chief's office, tell the chief to go F himself, and this is what we're going to do instead. But he wasn't allowed to do that anymore. So now his folks felt betrayed by Danny, or he felt that his folks felt betrayed by him, because he was no longer doing that. And then there was some other stuff going on at home too. So all of that combined, I think betrayal is what killed him. And he was just a vehicle for that. So it turned me around, though. So when I wrote that article, so I was already retired, and I didn't have that internal connection anymore. So it was an interesting dynamic, because nobody was watching out for me, because I was retired. But when that article went so public, somebody goes, "Ooh, I think Dave's in trouble." we should have somebody reach out to him. So somebody did. His name was Michael Pellegrino, a good friend of mine who I also had worked with, who's also now the new chief resiliency officer for the county that we worked in. And the state of New Jersey had just established a resiliency program for law enforcement based on this horrible track record we had over the last 18 months of self-inflicted harm. Michael was like, hey, you can either come do this program and be a leader in this space, so we can send you on a 30-day vacation to get a little help. So I choose to take the program.
Do you know a ballpark of the statistics of during that time, the people that were having issues with self-inflicted harm?
So that was 2020. My last good data that is effective is 2019, where we had 18 suicides in law enforcement, just in New Jersey alone. So it was 9 retired and 9 active that we know of. So the retired guys is harder to get a beat on because they disperse, right? They're not, if you retire from a department in New Jersey, most of these guys are in South Carolina, Florida, Arizona, wherever, someplace sunny and warm. You don't hear back when these things happen. So our in-state statistics were 18 in a year, which was 2019, and which are really high when you have a small state like New Jersey. So right now, the average is about 3.2 suicides for every in the line of duty homicide. So for every police officer that's getting killed in the line of duty, and that doesn't include, by the way, health while on duty, that doesn't include car crashes, just literally being killed by homicide in the line of duty, we have 3.2 officers dying by their own hand, which is insane.
What does that number work out to? I mean, because like you're saying, it's New Jersey's population, but then the number of police officers within that population. What numbers are we talking about?
So for suicides, and we're talking somewhere between 200 and 300 a year. So about one every 36 hours.
In police, in law enforcement.
Just in law enforcement, yeah. And with everything going on right now, politically, and especially at the southern border of the United States, we're losing Border Patrol agents about one a day.
Wow.
Which is insane.
And so you feel that for the active duty officers, it can be a lot of the internal system that they don't feel right. And then for the retired officers, could that be because they've lost a sense of camaraderie? They've lost a sense of identity and a sense of purpose?
So that's a part of it for sure. Community is a big thing, right? It's for all of us. Doesn't matter what field you're in. If you're not part of something that's greater than yourself, it's very difficult to find that purpose. And when you retire from a uniform service, whether it's the military, whether it's law enforcement, EMS, fire, even in the medical professions, as a nurse or a doctor, when you leave that and you leave your scrubs behind, who are you?
Yeah.
And if you don't have a sense of who you are beyond what you are, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And that's where I found myself in retirement.
So that's a very important point, and also something that it is very reflective of what happens in the medical community. And a lot of the time so 2019, the pandemic obviously hit those of us that were in surgery very hard. So, there were no more elective surgeries. We were only being brought into the hospital in emergent situations. And that made me have a lot of downtime. And for the first time, in 15 years, because the rest of the time I was in education, I was in training, and I was working. And, you're just basically grinding. You're just grinding, and you're following suit of the people that were before you and set the examples of what it was to be in healthcare, what it was to be a professional, and what it meant to have people put their lives in your hands, right? So for the first time in 15 years, I was able to sit down and I was able to reflect on my journey and also the current situation of, do I even like what I'm doing anymore? Do I still feel like I have a purpose? Why am I so sad? Why am I so tired? Why can I not empathize with my colleagues and patients and their families anymore? Why do I hate what I'm doing? And a lot of it had to do with I never took a breath and looked up from the grind to realize that I was burnt out,
Yeah.
that I was completely burned out and used up. And I thought that that lifestyle was acceptable. I thought that that was okay. And another reason why a lot of doctors and surgeons they don't leave medicine before they are 70, sometimes 80 years old, is because again, our identity is completely tied to what we do. It's what gives us a title. It's what gives us status and purpose.
Yeah.
Whenever we're not building lives outside of what we do, and we're not focusing on who it is we are, we lose complete perspective and we actually just become less human.
You said use two words in the same thought that were very interesting to me and something I've been thinking a lot about. You talked about empathy and burnout. And what I have learned more recently than not, so I always believed that being empathic was really important in the line of work that I was doing, and certainly in the medical field, in the work that you do. But what I've learned more recently is that being empathic, you are taking on the burdens of others, trying to relate to them in a way that they relate to themselves. And truly, that's where the burnout comes from, because you are being inauthentically someone else trying to take on their burdens, which is what we do as service people that are trying to heal others. But the way I've been trying to look at it lately is to be more compassionate rather than empathetic. And being compassionate is more extrinsic in the fact that you are giving some part of you to someone else to allow them to survive or thrive. Where if you're being empathic, you are internalizing or being more intrinsic with somebody else's struggle. And you can only take on so much of that before you start to lose your shit yourself, you know? We're not programmed or available to live somebody else, so many other people's lives for them. But if you're compassionate, you can support them in living their own life to be the best version of themselves. And I think that's where this kind of ties back into positive psychology versus traditional psychology. And
Right.
to me, that's kind of how it's all coming together.
Because whenever I asked you the question, what's some important personality traits or strengths someone would need to work in law enforcement, and you went into the signature strengths such as honesty, courage, leadership, curiosity, judgment, and self-regulation. And then you also said empathy. Even though empathy is not a character strength,
Correct.
it's still a trait. But you said empathy is also essential. So having stated that, now to say compassion, how are we bridging that gap?
That's a great question. And I'm not 100% sure. For me, it's been a journey of transition from one trait to the other, or one word to the other, however we want to define that word. And when I answered that question with empathy, I believed in that. And I still do, by the way. But I also believe that it is not a healthy journey to be solely empathic as you go through these service journeys, these service professions.
Just like anything else, you got to know your boundaries.
Yeah.
You've got to know what is serving you and what's destroying you.
Yes.
So we have to be able to identify where our boundaries are. And I think that a lot of that has to do with self-awareness.
Mhm.
And a lot of us lack that, again, because it's been modeled for us to, you just get it done. You know what?
Yes.
You may not like it. Fine, complain about it, but just get it done because it has to be done. And a lot of the times we're told, we ask, but why? And we're told because that's how we've always done it. How do you feel
That's my
about answers?
least favorite statement on the face of the earth, as you know.
Absolutely. I want to ask you this because I think that obviously you transitioned into positive psychology to help yourself and to help your other
Yes.
brothers in blue. But let's talk about how the principles of positive psychology can be applied to improve community police relations and enhance law enforcement practices.
So that's a great discussion to have. And, one of our MAPP siblings, Eric Patterson, who is an FBI agent, wrote his capstone on that, on how to bridge communities and law enforcement. And I am so grateful for his leadership in that discussion. I think it's so valuable. And positive psychology, I think, is that bridge, because right now there is a lot of civil discourse. I don't know how much of it is civil and how much of it is discourse, but the between law enforcement and the communities.
Two very incongruent words in today's
I
time.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that I don't know how that got into the lexicon as a phrase, but it is an interesting phrase to consider. And when we look at surviving and thriving, which is traditional psychology and then positive psychology, where -1 to 0 is psychology, therapeutic, clinical response to get somebody just to survive. Then going from 0 to +1, that's the positive psychology piece. We're getting people to go from that survive mode to thriving. I think if we take the individual out of that conversation and put in community, I think policing can be that positive psychology piece that allows the community to thrive. But how do we infuse them into the middle of that to allow those honest conversations to take place and allow the functions of the local police department? Because honestly, state police does their thing, federal law enforcement does their thing. The bread and butter of what we're talking about in allowing communities to thrive and to be connected to the law enforcement community is the local police department. I don't care if you have a one sheriff, community that covers 10,000 square miles somewhere in Idaho, or if you have, NYPD or Chicago PD that has tens of thousands of police officers covering, a very small space. So it's either way you look at it, that is the bridge. So when we talk about pulling law enforcement into the community, how can we serve them best? What are the needs of that individual community? And when we have these national conversations about policing, it doesn't always apply to it's not going to apply to every agency. I don't say it doesn't always, and most of the time it doesn't, because you're talking about a specific problem in a specific community that may be unrelatable to somebody else's community. And I think that's where we went wrong in this.
So give me a specific example of that, of different problems in different communities and how they would need to be approached differently.
So when you look,
whenever we talk about positive psychology, though, and we talk about our fundamental principles of, positive emotion, engagement, meaning, relationship, and accomplishment and achieving, those are basic principles that all of us need, that
correct,
as individuals and also as community. So even though the problem may look different, the foundational need for solving it is the same.
yes, but the approach to solving it is going to be different, I think. When we had, over the last couple of years, the big phrase was the defund the police movement. And that came out of ideas of people that were not looking out for the betterment of their communities. And when that evolved and spawned into what it was, the communities that were being negatively affected were the ones being attributed to that statement and wanted nothing to do with that statement. So as an example, here in Trenton, where I live, that there were activists that came from outside the city to say, we don't want the police here anymore, defund the police, do this, that. The community was like, whoa, we have a huge problem here with drugs and guns and violence. The police are the only thing keeping us alive on our doorsteps. So we need them, we want them, we appreciate them. But that was the people that lived in the community. Their narrative was being stolen from them by people that didn't live there. And it was a very unfortunate experience because the political establishment, the elected officials, were reacting to a national conversation that didn't apply locally. And we also had that same problem in the suburban community where, next to Trenton, here in Hopewell, where the elected officials were trying to engage in a national conversation to appease people's social media needs rather than addressing what we had going on in our specific town, which was nothing. It was all harmonious until people inserted a solution to a problem we didn't have. And I think that's where things change. So when you look at the positive psychology piece, where James Pawelski talks about his elements model, or where Sonia Mercy talks about person activity fit, I think we need to apply those principles to policing. Not every problem is going to be had in the same place, and not every solution to those problems is going to be effective in the places that have the problem. So we need to adapt and overcome to make sure that we're affecting the needs of the individuals in our specific locations.
What is the one thing that no one agrees with you about whenever we talk about applying positive psychology in law enforcement?
So the one thing that I believe in is a bottom-up philosophy in policing. I think those that are the lowest ranking folks in the department, the patrol officers, the people that are out on the street having the interactions with the community, I think they're the ones that need to have a greater say, rather than the top-down philosophy, which is standard paramilitary structure, where the chief says, "Oh, these are the initiatives. This is what we're going to do," and it filters down through the command structure, and then the guy on the street has to enact that plan, whether it's right for the community or not. When you get to the point of executive leadership within law enforcement, you're so disconnected from the people in the community you're serving. You're more in line with the policy values of the elected officials that put you in that appointed position, that you are no longer connecting to the people that these decisions are affecting. And I don't care, again, if that's a small half-square-mile community or something as big as New York City or Chicago or LA, or even into the federal government realm. I think that we've lost track of what's important, and we're enacting policies that are propel our own careers or our own initiatives, or what we think other people want, or what we want other people to have. And rather than the community governing itself and us being there to support that. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is we need to have more of a bottom-up, I don't want to say bottom-up leadership, because that's not true, but more bottom-up policy making, where we can bring the needs of the community up the chain so they can then bring effective policy down the chain.
You're also telling young officers who ask that question, why do we still do this, and get the answer because that's the way it's always done. If they don't agree with that answer, you're saying,
Right.
Okay, don't just complain about it. I want you
Right.
to bring something tangible. I want you to bring me something that says, but there is a better way, and we can do this, and this is how we implement it.
Absolutely. And if you can walk into the chief's office, if that's okay in your department, with something in hand that says, here's the solution, here's what I looked at, here's how it's not working today, here's a solution that I kind of got some background and some feedback on from people within the community or through research, and here's a way we can do it differently and do it better, in a way that people are going to appreciate us better in the work that we're doing for them. Because in the end, law enforcement is a job where you're serving the community. You're not serving your agency. You're not serving the political faction. You're serving the people of your community. And if you lose sight of that, you lose sight of your purpose. And I think that's where things begin to go sideways.
Well, I'm exhausted by this conversation. Just exhausted. It's just too heavy. It's just too serious. It's too political for me. Yeah, it's a lot. And so I want to play a game.
Let's do it.
Let's do this. So whenever I asked you what your top game is, at board game, card game, word game, you told me Cards Against Humanity. But you also emphasize the family version, right? Because you have a wife and you have kids, and this is how you have family game night, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right.
it's funny because growing up, I played a lot of games with my mom and my sister, and I didn't love it. It's like Chutes and Ladders, Monopoly, whatever. And I've never got into the board game thing. But my kids brought to me Cards Against Humanity. I'm like, this is my realm. This is what I like. Be gross and disgusting. I love it.
Oh, it's terrible. So, yeah, it's the board game for horrible people.
Yeah.
And so basically, Cards Against Humanity is a fill in the blank party game, and it turns your awkward personality and lackluster social skills into an hour of fun. So the game is pretty simple. Each round, one player asks a question from a black card, and everyone else answers with their funniest white card. So David and I both have played this game. If you need more information on Cards Against Humanity, Google it. Just Google it. It'll give you plenty of information. All right. So David and I both have our own white cards. And now I'm going to read from the pile of black cards. David, you ready to do this?
A little nervous, but yeah, we got this.
Yeah, you should be nervous. You should. Because this is the adult version, because your wife and your kids aren't here. Okay.
Oh boy, here we go. Yeah,
Here
usually at home, we get a lot of butt jokes out of this and a lot of fart jokes and whatever else, but this will be interesting.
Yeah. So are both of your little kids, are they male?
So I have three. My oldest is 16. He'll be 17 shortly in a couple weeks. My middle guy is 15 and my daughter's 10. So, and my 10-year-old daughter, as much as I love her, she's the grossest of the three and comes up with all the gross jokes. So when we play Cards Against Humanity, she has the nastiest ones.
My kind of girl. Okay. So question number one. In its new tourism campaign, Detroit proudly proclaims that it finally eliminated what?
I'm going to say, because it's Detroit, they finally eliminated flesh-eating bacteria. Sorry about living in Detroit and you're listening to this, but it is a...
Look, if you're from Detroit, you probably agree with that statement.
You probably had flesh-eating bacteria.
Yeah, don't even come at me, Detroit. Okay. So I'm going to say that Detroit did away with the Donald Trump seal of approval.
That is probably very true.
Mm-hmm. So in its tourism campaign, Detroit proudly proclaims that it has finally eliminated flesh-eating bacteria or Donald Trump's seal of approval.
Sweet.
Okay. I think yours took it. I think yours is funnier. Okay.
We'll see.
So next question. Blank is a slippery slope that leads to blank. So blank is a I can't even say it. Slippery slope that leads to blank. I'm amazed I can even say Scout Sanders. Alliteration's not my strong suit, apparently.
All right. Here's about to get awkward. Ready? So the first one is going to be cockfights.
Uh-huh.
And the second one, because of the topic of the day, an honest cop with nothing left to lose.
Okay, so I want you to fill in the blank. So blank is a slippery slope. So that was cockfights.
Yep.
Cockfights, slippery slope that leads to a cop with nothing left to lose. Yeah. Okay, all right, hold on. I've got my second piece, but now let me find my first. Okay, yeah. Wiping her butt is a slippery slope that leads to loose lips. Wiping her butt is a slippery slope that leads to loose lips.
Wow, that can be taken in so many different ways. I can see my 10-year-old daughter using that one, though.
I told you she's a girl after my own heart.
Absolutely. Dirty birdie.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh.
My daughter, not you.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. Glad we clarified. Okay. Next question. What does Dick Cheney prefer?
Oh boy.
Uh-huh. What does Dick Cheney prefer? Okay, I'm gonna say mine while you're figuring yours out, or you can just tell us both. But
now go for it.
What does Dick Cheney prefer? Goblins. Was that before or after he was shot?
Well, since he survived, I guess we're going to say before. After would have been a moment of silence.
Just checking. In LA County Jail, word is you can trade 200 cigarettes for blank.
Oh boy. Trying to make this age appropriate.
I really wish I wouldn't have used wiping her butt.
We're going to use sexting. It is prison.
Okay. So for 200 cigarettes in LA, okay. Word is you can trade 200 cigarettes for sexting. Okay. Mine is in LA County Jail. Word is that you can trade 200 cigarettes for full frontal nudity.
And what do you get for 400 cigarettes? That's the question.
All right. Two more. Two more. Oh, let's see what we got. What we got. Okay. What ended my last relationship? What ended my last relationship? I don't know if it means the person you're playing with's relationship or your own relationship. I don't know. But what ended your last relationship?
Um,
Still wish. I still wish I had wiping her butt.
yeah, mine may get into that area. Flying sex snakes.
Flying sex snakes?
Yeah,
There was a
she wasn't
preference.
down with it. Yeah, she
Oh,
wasn't down with it.
so this is actually kind of sad, but I'm going to use this one. What ended my last relationship? Daddy issues.
Mm,
Hmm.
I've been there.
So have I. Okay. It's amazing. It's amazing. Okay, last question. Let me make sure it's a good one. Mm, mm, mm. What has been making life difficult at the nudist colony?
My answer, my final answer, according to the cards that I was given, a tiny
Mhm.
horse.
Tiny horse. I'm going to say Her Royal Highness Queen Elizabeth II.
Hmm.
Mm,
I could have gotten creepy with mine though, because I have child beauty pageants.
that's disgusting.
That's creepy.
No.
Gross.
Look at the hand signal. Look at the hand signal. None of that. Oh,
No, I agree. There's a couple here that would have been less appropriate, but I'm going with tiny horse.
okay. Yeah, let's stick with that one. Ding, 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 ding.
And that's
Oh
what you
my,
get with Cards Against Humanity.
it's really, it's a family fun game. You teach your kids so much about the world. Okay.
That's it.
And learn so much about the world as an adult.
Absolutely. You know what? I learned more about the world from my kids than I thought I ever would know.
What has been the most shocking thing that one of your children has told you?
Phew, that's a great question. So much of it is shocking. One of the most shocking things my kids have ever told me. It's got to come from my daughter. Uh, she's insane. Um,
I I love her already.
gosh, I don't even know. Trying to think of what could be most shocking. Some of it's just like funny stuff, but I would have to say, especially as they were learning language, their words for different body parts. Um, and like sometimes things that you're like, what do you, and then they describe what they're talking about. You're like, whoa, that's interesting. But yeah, I would have to say words for different body parts where it was the funniest things that most shocking things my kids have come up with. And I won't repeat them live on air here. But
That sounds
but that yeah, so that's some of the things my wife and I ruminate about when we talk about the kids is sometimes the funny things that come up with, and the language learning piece was awesome.
I think that's probably a lot of parents top thing to talk about or to exchange. Like you should have heard what Johnny said today. Like
Yep.
I knew that it wasn't appropriate and I was keeping a straight face, but I was dying on the inside. I'm sure that happens a lot for parents.
I'll tell you the best thing that any of my kids ever said to me though was when I was talking to my oldest. We ski a lot in the winter, and so our weekends is meet the kids and I together. My wife doesn't ski, so she does her own thing, and it's just me and the three kids, which is my special time with them. And I said to my oldest last winter, I said, we do this every weekend. And if you ever want to stay home and like hang out with your friends or go to parties or whatever, let's talk about that and let's engage in that. And he goes, you know what? I'd rather spend my time with you than with friends that aren't really friends drinking and doing stuff I don't approve of. That was probably the most shocking thing I ever heard from a teenager.
proud of you were you in that moment?
I was equally as proud of him as I was myself because, they don't get those values unless you teach that to them. But they also don't have to embrace them when you teach them those values. So it was really cool for me that he rather spend that time with us as a family than, have that potentially negative experience with his friends. So he gets it. And that was awesome.
My heart just melted a little bit.
Yeah, mine did too at that time. It was a cool response that I didn't expect. So shocking, maybe not so much, because you hope that's what would come from a kid, but it was the most impactful for sure.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's beautiful. Good job. Good job, Dave and Dave's wife. Good job.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right. You're welcome. All right. So let's talk about a little tricky subject, shall we? It's not as if we
Mm.
weren't talking tricky subject already, but I think that it's important for people to hear this conversation. I want to discuss patriotism in today's society. What's your perspective on how patriotism has evolved in current times?
I think that's the word. I think it's devolved, which is sad and it's unfortunate. Uh, when we were asked through the MAPP program for simple exercise, I'm sure you were asked to do the same thing in your class. When we're entering the subject of humanities, the first assignment, if you want to call it that, was what is a symbol or a sign or a picture or something that is so important to you that describes you or passionate to you. I forget exactly how it was phrased. Pick a thing. So I chose the American flag because it represents so much to me. And we've talked about a lot of that from my grandfather to my work to being service oriented, duty oriented.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of people in class that were offended by that. And so we had that discussion, and it was an honest discussion. And, I have a fair amount of friends from different backgrounds and different cultures, and there are some that represent those diversities within our class. And the reaction was the flag doesn't, and this is from the same groups of people in the different parts of my life, said the flag doesn't represent our journey.
Mm.
And therefore, we don't think it should be a symbol of being an American.
Mm.
And I was shocked because that's exactly the opposite of what I see in the flag.
So let me ask you this question. What's the difference between assimilation and appropriation?
I've asked that question exactly in that way. It's a great question. And I brought that up in class. And the response is, whoa, I never thought about that before.
Yeah.
And I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up. That's been like my biggest thing recently.
I've been all over the world. I've been across the United States. And it's always very interesting because for me, particularly whenever I'm in Europe and people, they either think I'm Canadian or American. And so I obviously will say, yes, I'm American. And you get a lot of mixed reactions.
Yeah.
So in Europe, it's not always positive. But I will tell you that in less developed countries, it is. It's
Correct.
always positive. It's always positive. That is an important difference for me because it is almost saying that those that are less fortunate than Americans, and also some Europeans, they recognize what the values and what the beliefs of America's Constitution and of American people, how that's beneficial, why that's beneficial, and why they still believe that in America, if you work hard enough, you can make your dreams come true.
100%.
And that's very different whenever we talk about the opinion of some European nations and just some European individuals specifically. Now,
Mm-hmm.
this is the thing though, David, I'm not saying that they're necessarily in the wrong. Because I will say that there have been policies and there have been things carried out through, through our 200 years of existence
Mhm.
that have always been, let's just say, friendly,
Of
and
course.
haven't always been thinking about the humanity or the
Mhm.
inhumanity, right?
Great.
So there are things definitely that I can disagree with, and I can say, yeah, that wasn't good. However, I can also say, based on our Constitution and what we set out to be and what we set out to be an example of, I still believe in those values.
We can make mistakes and fix them. Other places have made mistakes and perpetuated them. Uh, in this country, we are not infallible. We have made some really bad choices along the way, whether they are social or political or otherwise, but we've learned from them and we've moved forward in a way that is in betterment for the collective as a whole. And I believe that we continue to do that. I believe that we are the greatest experiment ever in humanity. And an experiment doesn't come with a defined end. An
Mm.
experiment is science. It comes with continual evolution of learning. And even in the scientific community, even in psychology, positive psychology, the physical sciences, you never stop being curious about what you can do to make it better next. And if we can stop pointing fingers at each other and saying that we are still the greatest place on earth, but let's make it even better. And how do we do that? I think we have a really good chance. But I think right now, where we've all retreated to our corners, which is completely the opposite of what this country was founded upon, we're going to struggle to make things better because we're not putting ourselves in a position for that success.
Yeah.
So I think that's where patriotism comes in. And I think that, if we want to bring this back to it through a positive psychology lens, when you look at Ivan Prolotensky and his wife and Aura and the work that they do about mattering, at first, I'll be honest with you, I struggled with it. I struggled reading the beginning of their most current book. I felt like it was this utopian view of something that I couldn't grab onto. But when you look at the underlying factor, literally the one sentence that all it comes back to is adding value and feeling valued. I think where we have come to in this really strong division we have, we're more concerned about feeling valued than we are about adding value. And I think we've lost that piece of our collective society in this country. We are no longer giving more than we're taking. And therefore, the resources eventually become depleted because nobody's putting them back in. So I think that's where we're struggling in our patriotism right now.
But David, I mean, obviously there's a lot of social issues that
For
still
sure.
exist in the world and specifically in the United States. I think the past 3 years have definitely shown us that there are very strong divides. My question to you is patriotism blind? Should it be blind? If we're saying that we're American, so X, Y, and Z, then how do we then bridge that gap for those that are in our country, are American citizens? Maybe they're second generation from somewhere else. Maybe they're, European Americans and they have a very long lineage. Do we now start calling them un-American? That's my question. Is because
Yeah.
should we be pointing that finger, and should we say, well, if you're American, then your patriotism is blind. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter really what you see affecting others. It's more about what we stand for as Americans and how we perpetuate that, continue to participate and to grow that ideology in our country and then also abroad. So
So I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I don't think it is blind. I think it's actually quite the opposite. I think that we need to be celebrating our differences rather than dividing ourselves by them. So if we continue to hyphenate our Americanism, I think that's what is the divide. Uh, if we can celebrate what makes us different types of Americans, I think we can unify around that. Or is it fair that everybody has the same opportunity to work towards that end? And that end may not be the same for you and for me. And quite frankly, the end that you desire may not be the same that it is for me. So who is rightfully allowed to then say what's fair in the end and not? Because you may not want the same things I do in the version of a third party who says this is what fairness looks like. So I think fairness and opportunity is important. I struggle to believe that fairness at the end, other than happiness, to be a value, a construct that we can universally work towards. Because your version of what the end looks like is going to be different than mine, and we don't need somebody else to tell us what it should be.
So let's talk about lessons and future vision. So lessons and future vision. So what are some of the key lessons that you've learned from your journey from law enforcement to studying positive psychology?
So the lesson, I think the big lesson, the big takeaway for me is understanding who I am versus what I am. And then when I say I mean the police officer. Obviously, I fall into that category. It's something that I had struggled with my Rocky transition. But I think that's the biggest takeaway for me from the law enforcement profession, moving into positive psychology. I think the lessons in positive psychology can help guide us to answer that question for ourselves and who we are rather than what we are. Because in the end, when your time comes and you take that uniform off, that badge off, and it's no longer a part of what you're doing today, it becomes part of your journey to today. You have to let it go and move on to the next chapter. You don't have to say goodbye to it. It will always be part of your journey and a piece of you. But now let the you grow as that piece becomes percentually smaller.
So one important lesson that you believe everyone should learn by the age of 35 is learning the difference between success and significance and the ability to fall, not fail, but to fall forward and never quit.
Yes, as something that I've learned along the journey itself. And, I go back to the great prophet Jocko Willink. For those of you that know or don't know him, he is a retired Navy SEAL that I see as the great deity of our time and has all the best one-liners that I've ever come across. But so Jocko says, you never fail unless you quit. And so to fail forward means you had to quit at something before moving on to something else. And I don't believe that if we're moving on, we've never really failed. We can fall forward and we can rebuild from our mistakes or from places that we faltered. But I don't believe in failing unless you've actually quit and hung it up and said, I'm done. And I think when you've done that, you failed yourself more than anything. Because everything we've done up to a moment is part of the journey. It's part of the experience. So if we don't take that to move forward, we're not learning from our experiences, good or bad. And I think that we taking those moments forward is important because it's our journey, it's our story. And if we're doing our story in silos and isolation, not only are we not learning from our own experiences, we're not giving other people around us the opportunity to learn vicariously through our own journey. And I think it's really important for people to see success and failure, especially if they're in a similar path and struggling to find their own way forward. If they can see your steps that you've taken and you live them out loud, it gives people the opportunity to try something new themselves. Now, if we all do this on our own and we don't speak about it, who's going to learn from you? And in the end, when your journey does come to eventually come to an end, because all of our journeys do, at least with our 2 feet standing here on this earth, what are you leaving behind for somebody else to take forward for you? Because if you've learned something and don't give it to somebody else, it was not worth learning in the first place.
Well,
So
you've summed up the whole reason why I do Positively Ridiculous podcast, is because, and bring people on to tell their stories, because I do believe that our personal narrative and our personal stories, that's we can glean so much from one another if we would just talk, if
Yeah.
we would really just come authentically and humbly and with curiosity, that we could learn so much from each other and about ourselves. And that's why I think that it's so important that whenever we're talking about civil discourse, that we come to one another with that spark of humility and curiosity, and also bring our intellect and bring our talents. That's really the only way I can see healing divides. So, how do you see the future of patriotism and political discourse evolving in the US as we move forward?
So I think it's a challenge. And, when you look at James Pawelski's red cape, green cape philosophy, I think the red cape side of this is that we are very quickly headed towards a new version of a civil war. And I don't mean, with muskets on different sides of the line. I think this is going to be more of a, well, I can't stand it here anymore, so I'm now going to pick up my family and move to here. And we're going to end up with completely, we'll call them red states and blue states to stay with the politics side of it. And we're going to end up separated. We're going to have coastal folks and we're going to have people living in the country. People already talk about it in those terms. And I fear, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I fear that that greater divide could create an even greater divide. It'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy that's going to put us in a position where recovery is going to be unrecoverable. That's my fear.
Mm.
I think that we are just in a really bad pendulum swing at the moment. And I think that we will have a reset and we will get back to our, and I know this can be a controversial term, but I think we'll get back to our more traditional constitutional values. And I don't mean going back to okay racism. I don't mean going back to okay sexism. I don't mean it that way. What I mean is the underlying values of what makes this nation the greatest one on earth and what gives us the ability to expand in a way that nobody else in this universe can. I think that's a good thing. And I think it gives everybody that equity opportunity rather than an equal opportunity, where we're allowing people to move forward in a way where everybody gets the same opportunity to succeed versus everybody ends up with the same end. I think once we get past those definitions, we're going to be in a much better place. And I think that right now we're really struggling to find out what our American identity is. But once that settles, I think it'll be settled in a way that allows people to thrive again. And I fear the worst, but I'm hoping for the best. And that goes back to James's reversible cape. And I think we have that ability as Americans. And that's what makes this experiment the best culture ever to exist.
Well, David, thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for giving us your insights and being candid about what those insights are. Your experience as a law enforcement officer has definitely provided you with a unique world perspective that I think that others need to hear. So I just can't tell you how pleased I am that we were able to have this talk, and that we were able to bring some pretty heavy hitting subjects to the surface, and not end up hating each other.
Yeah, love it. And honestly, law enforcement's the greatest show on earth. You get the best seat in the house. And anybody that thinks that it's an interest, go out there and do it. You don't have to serve a whole career to get your pension. Do 5 years, but take it. Take that opportunity and see the world through that lens. It is like going to the best circus you've ever been to. I loved it.
Well, so David's giving away tickets to the circus, everybody. Go and your local police station for more information. All right. Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure. And I know that you're still in the program at Penn, but I wish you the best of luck. But I don't feel that you really need it. I think that they made another brilliant selection and brought you into the family, and glad to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be part of this journey. And people like you and the classmates I've had, it's so special. And I'm so grateful to be part of a world that I didn't think was accessible to me, but I was given that opportunity and I'm running with it as fast as I can because it is so special.
So this is founder and president of 6'4 Consultants, retired police officer, master resiliency trainer, writer, and published author. A man who has been told, "You are so ordinary." This is David Berez. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Out at 11:46. I do have a question for you, though, one I didn't ask. What is 6'4"? What does 6'4" stand for? I'm familiar with 10.
Awesome.
What does 6'4" stand for?
That was my badge number.
Oh,
So interesting story behind that is when I started in Seaside Park in 1998, they give you a bucket full of like shitty tin badges, and you just pick one out and throw it on, and the number was 64. I was like, cool. I didn't think anything of it. And at the end of the summer, because we're part-time seasonal, and at the end of the summer, you throw your badge back in the bucket. The second summer I came back, they hand out the bucket again. I picked out a random badge. It was 64. I was like, well, that's cool. I got the same one 2 years in a row. Who'd have thought? And then when I got to East Windsor and I got my full-time job,
huh?
they gave me my badge number. And next in line was number 64.
Oh my God, that is like your universal destiny number.
Isn't that crazy? So after I retired, it's like, I got to pull this forward somehow. So I used that as the name of the company.
That's really cool. That was really, really cool. Because I was like, what is that call sign? Is that a call sign? No, it's your badge number. It's been your number.
And my kids have worn it on their sports jerseys now. Like it's a thing. So yeah, random thing, but a thing.
That's really cool. Well, David, really, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure having you on, and I really enjoyed our discussion. And hope you didn't find anything to be, I don't know, left of field or difficult or uncomfortable. But honestly, I want you to find things to be difficult and uncomfortable because I think that brings out our best discussions and conversations.
I agree.
Yeah.
And I loved the whole context of the conversation. And outside of our individual time, I don't even know how long it's been, almost 2 hours, that the way you do this is so awesome. And the format in which even you send things out in the email, the disclosures, the questions, I just think is so refreshing and such a great way to get to know somebody. I just think you do a great job with it, and I love it. It's evidently clear that this is who you are and what you do in a very awesome way. Because there's a lot of folks that I have, surrounded myself by that are now doing podcasts or writing or whatever, and it's so choppy and it's so I don't know who's actually listening to it because it's so wonky that as a listener, I can't even imagine, and some guys do a great job with it. There's some great people doing some great work, but I just love your authenticity. I love the way you're doing things. And I just hope that it finds its way out in the world where the world gives it back to you. So I just love what you're doing.
Thank you very much for that.
And I look forward to seeing how you evolve in all of this, because I think it's a special place. So.
Well, thank you, David, very much. Well, God bless you, son. All right. Well, again, thanks so much. And please always feel free to reach out to contact me, regardless if it's positive psychology or whatever. I'm available.
You as well.
Okay.
No, you as well. And thank you for everything. I'm so grateful for the work that you do, and hopefully we can cross paths again in it. So
yeah,
awesome.
I'll see you at Summit if you're there.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
If I graduate.
Yeah, that's always the thing. All right, Dave. Bye.
Keep seeing you. Bye.